Hi everybody, Steve Farmer once again bringing you more coverage from the 2012 U.S. Chess League. This will be the Week 3 matchup between the Seattle Sluggers and the Arizona Scorpions. I'm coming to you from an undisclosed location for reasons that I cannot divulge at this time. So, what happened to Arizona this past week? Well, the U of A football team got spanked by Oregon. And sad to say that on Monday night, September 17th, the Scorpions got spanked as well. At least at this point, it looks like Philadelphia is getting spanked by the Arizona Cardinals in football. I got to keep that quiet though. Okay, while this match was going on, I was not able to watch it live, so I am unable to bring you the games as they unfolded, unfortunately. And I'm going to bring you 3 game fragments, and then we'll look at the board 1 game in full. But we'll go through the opening of that rather quickly. I attended the SACA, the Southern Arizona Chess Association meeting on the 17th as this game was going on. And with me was Lev Altunian and Amanda Mateer from the Scorpions. So they were not able to play. However, we were getting updates through Amanda's phone as play unfolded, and it kind of put a damper on our evening at the SACA meeting. The first game fragment that we're going to look at is between Pedram Atufi and Fang from Seattle. Now, the players played a French defense Tarrasch variation, and they followed theory for quite a while. And we are here at move 41, where they had just gotten rid of a pair of rooks and are now in solely a queen and pawn endgame, where Pedram is up a pawn. And he chose whatever line he could to squeeze as much out of this as he could, but as we'll see, it's not that easy. Black, especially having the outside pass pawn, kind of balances things out. A4 had just been played by Fang, and now Pedram plays H5. Now he could have played Queen to A8 check, King to G7, and take that outside pass pawn, but this allows the E pawn to fall, and this is probably just going to end up being a pretty easy draw for Black. So I have to hand it to Pedram for playing H5 here, trying to get something started. Pawn takes was played, and now F4, A3, F5. This is the idea, to throw the pawns up the board as quick as he can and get something going. Now Queen to A7, check, King to G2, A2, E7, A1 queen. Check it out. We have 3 queens on the board. Should have 4 here. I think that promoting is the best move. He did not play that. He played Queen to E6. Check. Let's step back for just a moment here. What if he promotes? King to G7. Now, Mark Ginsburg had a good suggestion here. He suggested King to H3. And we'll come back to that in a moment. But I just want to show you that there's some dangers in a multi-queen ending. For example, what happens if you take this pawn? Looks simple and logical, right? Well, it's not so simple. Queen on A7 to G1 with check. King to H3, Queen A1 to F1 check, King to G4, and now the trouble comes in. You can see it, can't you? Queen to D1 check, and now King to G5, then we have Queen to D2 check, King has to come back, Queen G to D1 check, Queen has to interpose, but now we trade, and we skewer, and pick up the Queen. So you got to be careful in these positions. It's not so simple. But Mark Ginsburg in his article suggested King to H3, and he said there are no more checks, and he felt that White should score the point here. But let's look on a little bit here. After Queen F7, I don't think that it's quite so simple. Queen takes, King H4, Queen to D1, King to G5, and Mark felt that this was winning. Now it may be winning, but I'll leave that up to the brilliant minds of people like Mueller and Dvoretsky. Let them figure that out if they want to. As far as I'm concerned, I think a draw is what the result would be. Yes, I don't always look for the truth in chess, especially when you're fighting a clock trying to make a score here. Now, I know that Pedram was fighting real hard because he knew the situation on the other boards was not that great, and he was trying to get everything he could out of this. But if he had gone down this road, this is his best chance to win, but I don't think that even this works. For example, if Queen to D2 check, King takes, queen h2, queen to h4, queen to d2, queen c4 check, king g7, queen e4, queen to d6. I think that black's getting back for the defense just fine. Now that's not gospel because I'm not real familiar with queen and pawn endings. I've only had a couple of them in my life, and you know, they're the kind of things you figure out over the board. Atufi played queen to e6 check, and after king to g7, things are just dead level. f6, king to h6, f7, discovered check, king to g5, and unfortunately for Pedram, he has to keep checking. He has no choice. And queen to e6, king to g5, queen to d5, king to g6, and a draw was agreed here. Let's go back just a couple moves. You know, you could try and get fancy here with, you know, promoting to a knight, but it actually comes up short. And then you can try it again, because it's the only way to keep alive. If you go here, you're just going to get slaughtered. And then mate. So, yeah. Only way to stay alive is to promote to another knight, but after king e7, there's nothing left for white here. So, that's why in this position he has to just keep on checking. And a draw was agreed. Okay, we'll work through the games backwards from boards 4 to 1. So the next game we're going to look at is going to be on board 3. Here we have Robbie Adamson with the black pieces at the bottom, and he's playing Joshua Sinanan. Josh is rated 2253. Let's take a little evaluation of this position, see what's going on here. Now, this position came out of a Dutch defense. Now, I think that if black were to continue here with like rook to f6, aiming to swing it over to g or h6, that would be a good idea. Maybe h5, continuing the attack there. But for some reason, Robbie played bishop c8. Now, this is not a blunder. I wouldn't even call it a mistake, because it requires some accurate play by white to level out the game. I think if we go back before this move was played, that black is slightly better here. And if white doesn't play the right move here, black is going to be clearly better. But fortunately for white, he has a little tactical shot that can help out his situation quite a bit. If you want to pause the video, see if you can find what white should play here. Go ahead and do that, and when you think you got the answer, hit play, and we'll take a look. Okay, for those of you who watch my videos quite a bit, you know that I often flip the board to get a different perspective on it from the side that's to make the move. Not gonna do it here. Wouldn't be prudent. So if you haven't figured out the move, pause. Otherwise, we're moving on. Okay, the move to play here is rook takes e4, an excellent idea. Let's take a step back and see why he decided on this. Inside an experienced player's mind is always the chess triad: material, space, time. Kasparov would like to add in quality of pieces, but I think that just goes without saying. You want the best quality pieces on the board that you can. So, black seems to have a bit of an edge on, I guess time a little bit, because he's got more pressure on the king side. He's got more forces ready to flow in over there. So, time is a factor for him. So one of the things you want to do when you're behind in time is develop effectively. Okay, how does white do that? To develop effectively, he has to be defensive in some way. But defensive moves really don't work out too well for white here. So, what is the option to play here? Well, another rule in the chess triad is if you are down in material, you want to complicate things. Okay. But white's not down in material, so why should he bother complicating things? Now here's the trick to the triad. You can voluntarily put yourself down in material and then complicate things. It's the same way. If you lost a piece and you complicate things, or if you give up the exchange in this situation, after rook takes e4, you're down the exchange. So now you want to complicate. Now is this a bad thing or a good thing? Well, in this case, it's indifferent. It really just levels out the game, to be honest with you. But the options were worse for white. Therefore, this move, rook takes e4, makes a lot of sense. And I gotta tip my hat to Joshua for finding this. Very good move. I have a friend here in Tucson, Ed Yetman. He will sacrifice the exchange at a drop of a hat. His feeling is, if you give up the exchange in the middle game, the rook is really not worth any more than a knight or a bishop in the middle game. It doesn't have any really great jumping powers. It can't jump over pieces, long distances, and if there are pawns on the board blocking it up, it's no more powerful than a minor piece. Get it into the end game, that's a different story. But in the middle game, it's no better than a knight or a bishop. But the thing is you got to do something with the material while you have it. If you don't, the rook's going to pay off in the long run. In that case, white has sufficient counterplay here. So pawn takes rook, it's a natural move. And now queen takes e4. Okay, you can see one threat here, right? Yeah, you can see bishop to c4 is, well, it's somewhat of a concern. It would pin the queen. And that's not a good thing. Now, Robbie must have been a bit flummoxed by his opponent's move, and he starts thinking about this, and how do I attack? This is what I got to do, right? I got to attack. He's got the material advantage, he's got the pressure on the king's side. He's still in that mode of attack, and he plays queen at h3, check. Hey, it's check. How can it be a bad move, right? Well, that's a game I'd flick out, certainly, in a blitz game, and I probably would have ended up playing it in a slow time control, too. But if we look at this position and we go, okay, bishop c4 is a threat. How can I defend against that? And leaving the king on that diagonal, can I benefit from that? Yeah, you can. Bishop b7. I think this is the best move. And it would have really tested Joshua's calculating powers. Joshua would have had to have found queen takes b7 of all moves. We'll come back to that in a moment. But let's look at the alternatives here. Okay, well, the queen's hit, so one of two things has got to happen. You got to, one of three things. You got to take the piece that's attacking it. That's the main line we want to consider. But you can block, and you can move the queen. So let's look at that first, moving the queen. Queen at e3, for example. Well, pawn takes on g3, f takes, bishop takes e5. Now, he's not too worried about bishop to c4 because he can play bishop to d5 here. After d takes e5, I think that black is standing clearly better here. And after d takes e5 right away, well, now we play bishop to d5, preempting the move bishop to c4. And again, I think black is standing okay here. White's got a pawn and a piece for the rook, but black's got pretty well mobilized forces. So I think I'd prefer to have black here. All right, going back to where bishop to b7 was played, that was moving the queen to d3. What about blocking with d5? Well, we can take here. And now he can take it. We can take it and then bishop c4. Queen takes, knight takes. And now we're hitting the rook on g7 and the bishop on d6. So rook to g6 is forced. And I think black is a bit better here, but not as well as in the other variation where the queen moved. But I'd still prefer to have black here. Okay, those are some of the ideas. But the best move is to play queen takes b7. Now, after rook takes b7, bishop c4, pinning the queen, rook to e7, bishop takes queen, check, rook takes, and play is pretty level. White's again got a piece and a pawn for the rook, but play is much more level in this line than any of the others. So it really would have been interesting to see if Joshua had seen this beforehand. I haven't looked around to see if he had a blog yet on this game or not, but it's a very interesting game. Let's get back to our game, though, where Robbie played queen to h3 check, and now king to g1. Now this may look scary as hell for white, black swarming all around his king, but I think he can defend. Robbie now plays rook to f6. In keeping with the attacking motif, I'm going to go to h6, and we're going to force a mate down the h-file. Actually, it's not the best plan. Bishop to e6 is probably the best idea. And now if d5 here, we play f takes g3, f takes, and now bishop to f5 is the move. It might be tempting to play rook takes g3 to try and get at least a perpetual. You know, you have that in hand in some of these positions. But after pawn takes rook, queen takes, king h1, and then you come up here to try and mate him, well, he can just take the rook. And after bishop takes, guess what? Bazinga, rook to g1. White wins. So rook takes g3 doesn't work. Bishop f5, queen to e2, now queen to h5. Again, white has the piece and the pawn for the rook. Play is very unclear here. I'm not sure that white will have full compensation for this material in the long run. Going back in this variation where I'm suggesting bishop to e6, we just looked at d5. But what about pawn takes c5? Well, now we go f g3. And here, you don't want to take the bishop. That's a bad idea, because the pawn takes on h2. King moves over and mate. So h takes g3. Rook takes f3. Here there's a chance for white to slip up yet again with c takes d6. Again, doesn't work because of this. And that's mate. And if queen takes f3, then bishop c5. And, well, it's easy to see that white's going to get squashed like a bug. White's down a pawn, but that's the best thing you can say about his position. He's under immense pressure here. Going back after rook takes f3, it's best to take with the knight. And now that allows rook takes check, pawn takes, and now we get a perpetual. So, like I said, you have the draw in hand in this line. So, bishop to e6 seemed to make more sense, but perhaps Robbie felt his position was a little stronger than that and didn't want to allow a draw. Maybe he didn't even have time to consider all those lines. I don't know what the time situation was. And we're at move 27, so I'm sure Robbie was in some time pressure. Robbie's always in time pressure. Right, rook f6 was played in the game. Now, rook to e1. Probably queen d5 check was better. F takes g3. And I think Robbie has good chances to hold this game. He still has a bit of initiative, so why not? F takes g3. Bishop b7 comes in after all. Now bishop c4. And again, I'm sure Robbie was in time pressure. And what's your most natural instinct? Yeah, to play king to h8. And that's what Robbie played. It's probably the losing move. Let's go back and look at king to f8. Well, now if d5 here, rook takes, with check, pawn takes, queen takes, king f1, and bishop c8. And this is actually going to end up being a draw with best play by white. White needs to really find this move, knight to g6 check. Now, black is pretty much forced to take with the queen. Now bishop takes f6, bishop h3 check, king f2, bishop g3, king e3, queen takes f6. And there's a bit of a trick here too. Bishop b5 is the best move by white. But look what happens if he plays rook to g1, trying to come in on the g-file. Bazinga! The queen is trapped in the open field. No place for her to run. So that's why bishop b5 has to be played. Now bishop takes rook, queen e8 check, king g7, queen takes b8. And now black is a pawn up, but I would hardly call that winning. But he does have the bishop pair, and he has good winning chances. Back here in the game, though, Robbie played king to h8, which is the most natural-looking move in the world. But here, after the SBD, the silent but deadly, d5, I think black's position just crumbles to pieces. The dark squares are going to give him fits. So Robbie decides, well, I better get my king off of the dark squares, and that bishop's been blocked out of play on c4, so king to g8. Bishop f1, giving chase to the queen. And now I think Robbie should play queen to h5, which will leave white a little bit better, but he plays queen to f5, hoping the trade of queens will alleviate his situation, but it does not. Queen takes, rook takes, now bishop to h3. Nicely done. White's pieces soon take up very dominating squares. Rook f6, knight to c4. Rook to h6. There's no saving the game at this point for black, unfortunately. Had he tried rook takes f3, we got knight takes d6, bishop takes d5, but now bishop to g2, and the bishop on d5 is a goner, because if he tries to protect it with rook to d3, then we get mate. So rook takes f3 doesn't work out. So Robbie must have seen that, I'm sure. He plays rook to h6, and now rook checks, King f7, knight takes d6 is check, rook takes b8. Now we can play bishop takes d5, trying to get something for it. Bishop takes g7, king takes, now knight h4, threatening to fork. So rook to f6, knight to f5 check anyway. King f7, knight to e3, bishop to e4, bishop to g2. The trade happens, plays rook to e6, and now king to f3. And white is a full piece up, no need to play on. Robbie packed it in and resigned at this point. Okay, we're going to move on to board 2. In this game, we have Mark Ginsburg playing white at the bottom of the board, and he's playing Georgi Orlov from Seattle, playing the black pieces. Now, this is a King's Indian, and those of you who watch my videos know that it must really pain me to not bring you this full game because it was a King's Indian. Now, Mark played the move 9, bishop to d3 in the same-ish King's Indian. And it was an interesting line. He routed the bishop back to b1, and I think the black got a pretty good game. And we can see here that, well, I think the black's probably winning at this point. So things are not looking good for my hometown heroes, or my home state heroes, I should say. But never count Mark out. He plays king to f2. And now the best move here is to play c2. It was not played in the game. And then rook to c5, knight to g4 here, king to g2, rook to d2, king f3, rook to d3 check, king g2, and now a5. Now, we'll see this in the game, but they insert a couple of different moves in there before we get to that. So the game continuation went knight to g4 check, king g2, knight e3, king f2, knight g4. Now they got increase in time as they made these moves because there's an increment. King to g2, now rook to d2 here, king to f3, c2, rook c5, rook d3 check, king to g2, and now Orlov plays knight to e3 check. But I think a5 was the winning continuation. Such a small nuance, but let's take a look at that, because I think this is the most testing line black could have thrown white's way. Now what to do here? Now if he takes the a pawn, he has to take with a rook. If white takes with the rook on c5, then black's going to play rook to d2. If the king breaks the pin, then simply rook takes knight, and then the pawn will promote. So it's best to take with the a rook. But now knight to e3 check, king to f2, knight to d1. And now if king to e1, we get bishop c3, and this is the whole big plan of this. It's a blockade of that pawn so it can promote. So this is not a good line. So after knight d1 check, if he goes king to f1, then we go knight c3 with the same idea. And if he goes rook to a1 here, rook to d1 check is going to win. So after the move a5, taking that a pawn is not a good plan. What about rook c takes c2? That looks logical. Well, now we got a fork. King f2, knight takes rook, rook takes a4, and I think that black's going to win this pretty easily. If knight c1, and we can just throw in a couple moves here. Yeah, this is going to be an easy win for black. So the thing is here is that pawn's going to be able to march all the way up to a3, unmolested really. So I think that black is winning after this move a5. I'm sure we could delve into it a lot more, but we don't have time here. So if you'd like to look at this position, try flicking out the move a5 on the board and see what you can come up with. But in the game, Orlov played knight to e3 check and now king to f2. And we're going to go through these moves rather quickly here because the pattern is familiar to us. You know, he wants to play knight to c3. King to e1, bishop c3, and now he has to give up the exchange. Knight takes c3, rook takes c2. And Mark is well in this game, even though he is a pawn down, and it's an outside pass pawn. Mark knows what he's doing. I've seen him get out of many a fix, and this game is no exception. Of course, it's not real difficult for him either. This is not all that terribly complex. Rook to a2 is played, rook to d7, rook to a5. Now the ultimate goal, of course, is for white to trade minors, and then the draw is assured. rook to b7, king d1, rook to d7, king e1, rook to e7. A little bit of a trick here. If he goes rook takes f5, that's terrible, because knight takes g3. And if rook to e5, well, first of all, if rook to a5, it just takes. So rook to e5, rook takes, pawn takes, knight takes, king takes, and king to e7. And we have a very simple win here. The idea is you make two weaknesses for the opponent to defend, and he can't defend both. So here, for example, king to e4 or f4 has to be played so you can protect the e pawn. And then we have the a pawn as a decoy, and this is just going to win the game. You can't defend against both of these. For those of you not familiar with the rule of the pawn, you don't have to count my pawn goes here, his king goes here, my pawn goes here, his king goes here. All you do is you draw a square like this. Draw a diagonal from where your pawn is to the last rank, to the promotion rank, and then draw a line along that file and along that rank, as you see here in yellow. Now, if the white king is within that square, on the arrow line or inside it, he can draw. But in this example, white has to take that pawn on a4, which means he loses. So king takes a4, and the pawn just marches on in. See, he's a move too late. So you don't have to really count. If you know the rule of the pawn square, you can save a lot of time. Now if he tries to bring the king back to defend against that pawn coming up, now we have the rule of the floating pawns. Now even if black's f5 pawn were not there and it was put on d4 or e4, black still wins without having to move his king. But here it's extra simple. Pawns are just too far apart. He can't stop both of them. Yeah, he can get one, but he can't get his brother. The reason I suggest moving your pawns instead of trying to bring your king up to promote him is that when you get a more powerful piece promoted, it helps to cut down on where your opponent can move. So if you're in time pressure, you don't want to keep moving your king back and forth when it's not making any good, useful moves. But if you promote, such as in this case, we just have mate in a couple moves here. So, for example, if he goes here, now he goes here. Now we bring the king in to block the king from coming out anywhere further. After this move, we can go here, check, further cutting back the king, and now it's mate on the next move no matter where he goes. So that's just an example for people that are not used to the rule of the pawn, floating pawns, and the reason why you want to promote as quickly as possible rather than using your king to marshal him in. You could lose on time if you were playing it too cautious and you move your king in to help marshal the pawn up. Alright, enough of that. Let's get back to the game. King to f1 was played. Yeah, Mark avoids rook takes f5 like the plague. Rook to b7 and knight to d4. Again, taking this is not good. Now f5. Okay, just real quick explanation on this pawn ending after the move f5. You see I have the rule of the pawn here, but I have it in the square in front of the pawn on a7. You need to do that because the pawn on its first move can move two squares. So it's the same as if it was sitting on a6. It can reach a5 in one move. So we see here that if white were to play king to f3 and then g4 in order to try and liquidate the last remaining pawn on the king side, black's f pawn, and then run over and capture the a pawn, he will not be in time. So put in your mind's eye king to f3. We'll even make a move with the black king. King to f3 for white, king to e7 for black, g4 for white, pawn takes g4. Now, if white plays king takes g4, he's going to be outside of the square of the pawn. And black can just play a5, a4, a3, a2, a1, a queen. Alright, let's get rid of these arrows and discuss what you have to do in this position. You actually are going to have to count moves. Sometimes it can't be avoided. You have to count the moves. How do you count moves? You don't absolutely have to go, he goes here, I go there. He goes here, I go there. He goes here, I go there. You don't have to do that. In some of these, you can make it a little simpler. Let's just look at this case. We're going to look at white side and black side. Now, white needs to get over and capture that a pawn and come back and defend on e3 as the arrows show here. Black, on the other hand, has to come around and capture two pawns and move the king out of the way in order to promote his f pawn. As we can see here, it takes white 9 moves to go up to a6, capture the pawn, and return to e3. It's 9 moves. Now if we look at black's side, it takes 7 moves. Only 7. It's a difference of 2 moves. So you can easily see that black is going to be able to go up, capture both pawns, and move the king to e3. At the time he has taken the pawn on f4, the white king will still be on b6, which means it will move to c5, and you can actually move the king to e3 to make the win very clear and simple. Now, if for some reason white had an extra move in there, black would still win because instead of going to e3, he could still bring his king to g3. So let's just test this out. So it's 9 moves for white, 7 moves for black. Seven for both sides. All right, now king to e3 works here. That pawn's just going to run up the board. But like I said, let's give white an extra move. Let's say he can play his king to d4, blocking the black king from coming in. Well, black just comes over to g3 and can still marshal that pawn in. And there's nothing white can do about it. So it's something to bear in mind in these positions. When you're counting moves, you don't have to go, his king goes to e3, my king goes to g7, his king goes to c4, my king goes to h6. You know, after a while, that gets very confusing. But if you're able to count the moves and see that white needs 9 moves to defend and black only needs 7 moves to get the position he wants, that's all you need to know, folks. Let's get back to our game. Sorry about the sidestep there, but I know that there are some newer players to the videos here, so I want them to understand some of these pawn endings. And that's why I wanted to explain why white didn't take that pawn on f5. I mean, that's a very typical beginner mistake, seeing the material there and just going to grab it. Well, it would cost white the game. Amazing. Knight to d4. And, you know, the thing is that Mark is using these tools too. I'm sure he sees that. He doesn't have to count it all out. He goes, no, that's just not working. And he plays knight to d4. Now, he has the ability to take on f5 with the horsey. Knight takes g3 as check. King moves, attacks the knight. Now he goes to h5, attacking f4. Rook takes f5, protecting f4. Knight to g7, hitting the rook. Rook to a5, limiting that pawn on a7. And now knight to e6. You know, back here there's a choice for black. Does he want to have a long drawn ending, or a rather shorter drawn ending? Either way he goes, having the knights on or off the board is not going to change the result. So knight to e6 was played, and then Mark just decided to simplify and traded. Now rook to a6, and the rest of the moves are pretty easy to understand here. Tries to push the king away, king e4, rook to here check, king e5, rook to b7. And now Mark comes up with a good idea. It's like, you know, he can push me off any time he wants. So what if I play f5 here? Rook to a5 was good too, but this move is quite acceptable as well. Now he can check, and now you don't. You don't go to f4 because he'll win the pawn with check. You don't go to e4 because he'll win the pawn with check. I guess you can go to f4 because his rook can't get back to protect a7. But you definitely don't want to go to e4. But king to d4 is just fine because after e takes f5, we have rook takes a7 with check, king f6, and we're going to easily reach a Philidor defensive position here. And it's rather funny. In this position, the computer is saying that black is winning. Not by much. It doesn't give him a queen yet. But it's saying that black should be winning this. But all chess players who have been playing at least a couple years know this as the Philidor defensive position, which is known as a draw. After rook b2 check, king to g1, f3, rook to a8. The rook gets behind the pawn now and is just going to harass the hell out of it, and the white king is in front of the pawn. No way to make progress. The players agreed to a draw. Alright, finally we come to our feature game on board 1. Okay, the match score right now is Arizona's down by a point. There are 2 drawn games and 1 loss. The loss was on board 3. So here we have board 1, which is Akobian playing white at the top versus Mackenzie Molner playing black. We have d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight f3, c5, d5, b5, the Blumenfeld. Yes, this opening is playable, but I think it's around this area that Max should start looking at a really solid repertoire for black. He's going to be facing tougher and tougher and tougher opponents. So I'll leave it up to Max. That's your choice. Play this or play more solid stuff. Bishop g5, ed5, cd5, h6, bishop takes f6, queen takes, queen c2, bishop e7, e4, all known theory, but now Mac plays a new move, queen to g6. Now the move queen to b6 had been seen before a few times, and after a4, pawn takes, bishop e2, d6, castles, castles, knight bd2, bishop d7, knight c4, queen c7, knight e3, a6, as in the game of Wang Yu versus Viejo Pons from Beijing, China, 2011. It ended up being a win for white in 24 moves, but this position is actually pretty level here. Let's go back to our game. Mac played queen to g6, and this move actually makes some sense. You know, it's trying to retard white's development of the king side, and I can see the idea behind that. Now, in Mark Ginsburg's article, he mentioned that this is probably the source of all of black's evils from here on out. I don't quite agree with that. I think this is actually a legitimate novelty. I think the problem was with the way Mac followed it up. He kept choosing second best moves, and the difference between the first best moves and the second best moves was like maybe only a tenth of a pawn. But you do that enough times, it starts to add up. So let's press on with the game here. Knight b to d2, knight a6. Mac loves a romantic style, and he loves to sacrifice stuff. Now, if we go back, I think if he played a6, white can play a4, and we have a complex game. So the idea of saving the pawn is not really there, but I think this is a better way to go. But knight to a6 is what Mac played. Now bishop takes b5. Even though white's a pawn up, I can't say that his position is that much better. White is better, but I don't think it's all that great. Now rook to b8. Yeah, taking on g2 here is very bad. Rook to g1, queen h3, rook takes g7. It's just horrible for black. So you don't want to try and get your pawn back, but rather you want to get counterplay, get your pieces involved. Rook to b8. Queen a4, now queen to b6. This is going to win back the pawn after bishop to e2. Queen takes b2. Castles. Queen to b4. But now that the pawn's been given back, I think white's position has improved a bit more. So I'd rather have the position and not the pawn than what we had a few moments ago. Queen to c2, queen to b2. Akobian doesn't want to exchange queens, goes to d1. Mac castles. Knight c4, and now goes d6 and e5. Mac throws out knight to b4, rook to b1, and queen to a8. A sad move to have to make. Is Karpov one of Mac's idols? But this is a necessary move, and it's not terrible, but it's not all that great either. a3 was played, now knight to c6, queen to d3, bishop a6, queen f5, rook takes rook on b1, rook takes rook, and now knight to a5. White stands better, but how do you turn this slight edge into a big edge? It's very difficult. Now black has a bishop pair, but fortunately for white, they're not well coordinated, they're kind of hemmed in. So if you can take advantage of that in the short term, you may be able to build up a long-term advantage. Knight fd2 was played, and now I think Max should have played knight takes c4. He played queen to d5. I think this is slightly inaccurate. I think after knight takes knight on c4, knight takes g6, hitting the queen, just drops back, bishop b7. I think that white's just a tiny bit better. I think black's going to be fine here. And after queen to d5, he has knight to e3, queen takes d2, bishop takes a6. And now again, I think Max should play knight to c6 here. He did not. He played c4. But if we step back and take a look at knight to c6, there's a couple choices. If queen takes d7, we have knight takes e5, queen takes a7, queen takes d6, rook to d1, queen to c6. I think that this is probably just a dead level position owing to the bishop's opposite color. After knight to c6, instead of queen takes d7, if he tries to flick in knight to c4 first, then we got queen to e2. Now if queen takes d7, knight takes e5, he can play knight takes e5, and it's best to take the knight. Rook to b7. It's a bit tough for black here, but I don't think that white's winning. Very difficult. So back in the game, instead of knight to c6, Mac played c4, which has some sense to it. He wants to bring the bishop to b6 and create some threats of his own. And now knight takes c4, knight takes c4. An interesting idea might have been queen to e2 here, not recapturing right away, but if he takes on a5, we can take on a6. Now you can go to b7 with the knight, we can bring the bishop out, queen takes d7, and queen to d3. Now, white's got two pawns, and that d6 pawn is very scary. So I'm not sure how well this works out for black, but as we will see, his position starts to go asunder pretty quickly here. So knight takes c4 was played by Mac in the game. Bishop takes, bishop b6. Now g3 was played. h4 looked like a good idea because it carries a combined threat of maybe bringing the rook to b3 and then to f3 or g3. But okay, g3 was played by Akobian. Who am I to argue with a man of his caliber? And now I think Mac should play queen to g5. He didn't. He played queen to d4. Again, let's step back and take a look at queen to g5. I think that if black can trade the queens, he might be doing okay here. Now, if queen takes, pawn takes, and yeah, white is better. He's a pawn up, but it's bishop's opposite color. I think black has chances to hold. If queen takes d7 instead, we can take on e5, queen to c6, queen to d4. And I think that this is just dead level. And if queen to e4, avoiding the trade, queen to d2, queen to f3, and queen to d4. Again, yeah, maybe white's a bit better here, but black certainly has some chances. And lastly, after queen to g5, if he goes queen to f4, queen takes, pawn takes, g6. Again, white's a bit better, but black has chances. Going back to our game now, queen to d4 was played. And now bishop to b3. Queen to c3, king to g2, queen to c6 check, king to h3, making sure he doesn't have any back rank issues. Maybe he wants to bring the king to h5 and try and deliver mate somehow. I don't know. Now, this is seriously just to get off the back rank issues. Queen to c3. Now, a4. White is actually starting to build up some threats on f7 and possible back rank threats as well. Queen to d2. And now I think that Akobian should play f4 to block the black queen from getting in. But he plays king to g2. And now Mac plays queen to e2, which I think is inaccurate. I think he should play queen to g5. And now if he goes queen takes d7, we got queen takes, queen to c6, queen to c5, and we have a fairly level game. Maybe white's a touch better, but I think black can hold it. And if queen to e4, which looks like the best, then queen to d2 and queen to f3. Yeah, white's probably still winning this one, but this really makes white work hard for it. Instead, though, he played queen to e2. And now I think that Akobian misses a chance here. I think he should have played a5. He plays bishop to d5, which doesn't throw anything away. But let's look at a5. Okay, the bishop is hit. And the best square, the best move for this bishop is to go to d4. And now, ba-da-bum, I told you we had pressure on f7. And he can't take the bishop, because if he does, Presto Magico, that's mate. So king to h8, rook to b7, queen takes e5, queen takes e5, bishop takes e5, rook takes d7, and white is up 2 pawns, has a rook on the 7th. Of course, when he moves that rook, he's going to drop the d pawn, but by taking the a pawn, he's making an advance outside path's pawn. Should be easy enough to win. In the game, though, Akobian played bishop to d5, and that doesn't throw anything away. And queen to d2. Zippy, get away from the window. Get away. You could fall out. Bishop c4. And now queen to g5 again, but it was not played. Still be winning for white, but make it harder on him. Queen to c3 was played. Queen to f4. Queen to c2. Rook to c1. Queen to g6. Rook to c3. King to h8. Getting out of that threat on f7 there. Rook to f3. f6. It's getting kind of dicey for Mac here. Bishop to d3. Queen to f7. Queen to f5. Now, this is not actually the best move. I mean, it has the same threat when he goes to e4, but e4 is a little bit more potent, and we'll see why in a moment here. Well, mate is threatened, so he's got to defend it. And now pawn takes on f6. Now, if g takes f6, we get rook to f5, queen to g6, a5, bishop moves, queen to b7, and white, playing the part of the hyena on the plains, has pulled the baby impala away from the herd, and the pawn is lost. White's winning easily. So back here, after pawn takes on f6, instead of g takes f6, you try rook takes f6. Then we trade rooks, queen to e7, queen to g7, and now a cool little move, if you want to study this position for a moment. It's a tricky little one. It baffled me for a bit. The best move here is actually bishop to e4, and we'll see why in a moment here. Okay, if you played queen to e8 check, hoping to get the d-pawn after queen to g8, queen takes d7, you're in for a rude surprise after queen to d5 check. It's going to pick up the bishop on d3, and things are not clear at all. But bishop to e4 sidesteps that completely. And after bishop to d4, queen to d8 check, queen blocks, we can pick up the pawn without any penalty. Winning for white. Back in the game, queen to f5 was played, but this allows the defense of g6. And now queen to e4. Again, this is a little bit inaccurate. Queen to f4, hitting the h-pawn is probably better, and a king to g7, bishop c4, just building up the position a bit more. But okay, accuracy is not everything at this point. White's got a pretty dominating position. Queen to e4 is played, now f5, queen to h4, king to g7. Now, I wouldn't say that white's winning anymore, but he's still got a much better position, and it would also come down to what the situation is on the clocks, who stands better there. Bishop c4 is played, queen to e8, queen to e7 check, trade the queens, rook to e8, rook to d3, rook takes e7, f4, bishop to c7. Now, I thought that maybe king to f8 might be the way to go here. Let's take a look at this. If bishop to b5, now, when you don't play the king over to e8, what you play is d5. What the hell's the point of this? You're just giving up a pawn. Well, you're in a bad way. And the point here is, let's take the immediate rook takes d5, then we're just simply going to play rook to c7 and try and whip up some counterplay. Bishop's opposite color might help black to hold this. And if he takes the pawn en passant, then we go rook to e2 check. And now we can hope for king to f3, rook to f2 mate, but I don't think Akobian would fall for that. So king to f1, rook f2 check, king comes to e1, rook takes h2, d7, bishop d8, rook to e3 with nasty intent, bishop checks on a5, king f1, rook to d2, and thanks to the power of the opposite colored bishop, the promotion square is well under guard. Rook to e6, king to f7, rook to a6, Now bishop to d8. If he goes to b6, he's just going to be pushed there anyhow. So bishop to d8 right away. Rook takes a7, king to e7, rook a6, rook to d6, rook to a8, now g5. And I have to cop out here, folks, and say I have no idea what the hell's going on here. Can white win this? He has the winning chances, but I'm not sure if it's an absolute concrete win. Yeah, the bishops of opposite color definitely give surviving chances to black. If he ever plays a5, black's going to play rook to d5, hit that bishop, and then grab the pawn on a5. Very difficult position, very complex. Unclear. I would play on with white, trying to get black to screw up, but I think if black plays absolutely correctly, he should be able to hold it. Again, we'll leave those conclusions to people like Dvoretsky and Mueller. Not to me. Bishop c7 was played in the game. Now bishop b5, and we're at move 51 here, folks, so they're plugging along. Bishop b6, bishop takes d7, gets a pawn, h5, king f3, king f8. Rook to d5, king to g7. I'm going through these pretty quickly because there's not much point of trying to explain that white's trying to bring his king around, get his rook and bishop into position so he can press forward with a5 and then e6 and then further infiltrate with his king. That's the plan. h3, rook f7, a5, bishop c7. Bishop g1 still puts up a fight, but I'm not sure he can save it. Bishop c7, e6, rook to e7, king to e3. Just as I mentioned, looking to build up the position more and more. King f6, h4, rook h7, rook c5, bishop d8, king to d3, rook to h8, rook to c8, king to g7, rook to a8, rook takes bishop to e7, rook takes a7, rook to b8, and now a6 is the most accurate move, but Akobian plays rook to d7, rook to b3 check, and now he plays rook to c3. Again, more accurate is king to c4. But the guys are obviously fighting the clock a bit and probably living on the increment at this point. We're at move 66. Plays rook to c3, rook to b1, rook to c4, rook to d1 check, king to c2, rook to d6, rook to a4 getting behind the pawn, forces rook to a6 getting in front of the pawn, king to b3, king f6, king to c4, bishop to d8, king to b5, bringing the king into play forcefully, rook to a7, a6, king to e7, rook to c4, king to d6, rook to c6 check, king to e7, rook to c8, bishop to c7, rook to e8. Now, if king to d6, we got rook to g8, king e7, bishop c8. Again, we're threatening to infiltrate. King to d6, and we take the g pawn. Easy win. Back in the game, Mac played king to f6 here. And after bishop c6, well, Mac realized that the match was already lost and decided to go ahead and pack it in and resign the game. Wow, a tragedy for the Scorpions in week 3. It started off the season so well. I have every confidence that I have Zippy? Zippy? Where'd you... Well, oh my god. Oh damn, okay. I gotta round up a cat. Alright, well, let's hope the Scorpions bounce back from this. That's all for now, folks. I'll be back in Tucson next week for the next match. Until next time, good luck. I hope I find that cat.